Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maliina Jensen. I work as an advisor with Inuit Circumpolar Council Greenland. And I'll speak a little bit to the protocols and some of the reports that ICC have developed for research. But a brief introduction to those of you who may not be familiar with ICC. We are an Indigenous Peoples organization representing Inuit, approximately 180,000, across Alaska, Canada, Galatlit Greenland, and Chukotka in Russia. ICC is a co-founder and permanent participant of the Arctic Council, and we also work very much within the UN system, where we hold a consultative status and an observer status within the IPCC. And we recently obtained a permanent consultative status within the International Maritime Organization. But for this presentation, I'll emphasize the Circumpolar Inuit protocols for equitable and ethical engagement, and a follow-up report on this. And these protocols, they were developed in 2022 and provide guidance for anyone involved in knowledge production with Inuit or on Inuit lands. They are grounded in international human rights standards, and particularly the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The protocols, they are grouped into different subjects or themes, including governance, communication, co-production of knowledge, partnerships, funding, data governance, permissions and ownership, and an overarching principle is that guidelines developed by Indigenous peoples should be recognized as such, and for Indigenous peoples to be recognized as rights holders and having the right to develop their independent ethical guidance and infrastructure that is separate, that may be separate from institutional ethical guidelines or review boards. I also wanted to just bring attention to other examples of Inuit developed guidelines and strategies and protocols, such as the National Inuit Strategy on research for Canada, and the Canadian Tri-Council Policy Statement on research involving First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and point to the fact that there are many places across Inuit Nunat where Inuit at different levels have developed their own research ethical guidelines and processes for permitting, etc. And to go a little bit back to some of the themes around how to understand the EEE protocols, ICC's protocols, is also to better understand Indigenous peoples' rights, including the right to self-determination at its core, and including within that the right for Indigenous peoples to determine their own overarching, their own political, economic, social development, and within a research context that would include the right to determine research programs and policies affecting them, their lands, territories, and resources. Other relevant rights include the right to enjoy benefits from science, free, prior, and informed consent. So the right to say yes, no, or yes with conditions, and also to understand free, prior, and informed consent as a process, right? So something that is not um, static, I think you could say, but something that can be withdrawn and that can be based on the consultation or the process in determining whatever is sought to be agreed upon. Cultural rights, including protection of languages, traditions, and knowledge systems, the right to privacy and family life, and the right to non-discrimination. Those are all rights that are operationalized within ICC's protocols. And I wanted to speak a little bit to UNDRIP as an instrument to understand as a remedial instrument, and also understanding Indigenous peoples' rights as inherent, regardless of whether states have recognized those rights, for example, in national laws. So, as was previously commented, this is an issue for Indigenous peoples when it comes to what is then the legal basis for example, implementing free, prior, and informed consent, or setting up permitting systems, for example. Building on the EEE protocols, ICC developed or published a more recent report advancing Indigenous knowledge from theory to practice, which came out last year, and it is based on multiple workshops with ICC staff and delegates and knowledge holders from across Inuit Nunat, and they seek to give more tangible recommendations building on the EEE protocols, and give very specific or more specific tools on implementation of the EEE protocols. And some of the key themes that the report addresses is the historical role of research, and what that means today, still in acknowledging and addressing the way that research was used in colonization, and understanding the role of research as extraction, which still today have some remnants in how science is done. The report also speaks to community-led and driven research, and what that means at all stages of research, and calls on a paradigm shift really in how Indigenous knowledge is perceived and implemented within institutional practices, and speaks to the systemic inequities that exist within research, and how ultimately those the practices and the systematic approach to how research is produced needs to be addressed, not just in how it's done within the current framework, so to say. Since this is an interact webinar, I thought I would also highlight some of the recommendations in the report that speak to the Circumpolar Biodiversity Monitoring Program within the Arctic Council CAF working group. So it has some key recommendations that I think are relevant, in particular to monitoring efforts. And last, I wanted to speak a little bit to data sovereignty, Indigenous data sovereignty, and highlight a more recent report that came out of the UN expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples. It's a study and advice on the right of Indigenous peoples to data, including with regard to data collection and disaggregation. And in understanding data sovereignty, of course, we have to recognize that data are a powerful cultural, strategic, and economic resource. And for Indigenous peoples, the right to data includes the right to access, control, repatriate, and govern all forms of data about, from, or affecting. In this case, I'm speaking from an Inuit perspective, and that this is also inclusive of, for example, cultural artifacts, historical records, and archives, etc., that are now placed outside of Inuit homelands, for example. So Inuit data governance, it means the right of Inuit to decide what, how, and why Inuit data are collected, accessed, and used, and understanding data sovereignty as an expression of, or let me rephrase, understanding Indigenous data sovereignty as an expression of Indigenous peoples' self-determination as peoples is also an expression of self-governing lands, territories, and resources. So this was more to reference the MRIP report. I think it's a really strong report that I recommend you all to read, because the EEE protocols, they address Indigenous data sovereignty, but this report really goes much further into depth with explaining and giving examples of how what Indigenous data sovereignty looks like different places in the world, but also what are the obstacles in implementing data sovereignty principles. Yeah, with that, I thought I would allow for more time for questions and comments. So a more brief introduction with references to some of the protocols and reports that I hope can be of help and something that you may find interesting to dive deeper into. So, qoyanak.